Montana Territory, summer of 1883. The wind hit hard across the high plains, carrying dust and the smell of pine, when the woman stumbled out of the woods with nothing but a torn shawl over her shoulders and two exhausted children trailing behind her. Her name was Hallie Prescott. 23. Widow? Her husband had died the winter before in a logging accident near Helena, and what little money she had left was taken by the man who promised to help her reach her cousin in Miles City. Instead, he'd left her and the children in the middle of nowhere with an empty wagon and a broken wheel. The boy, Henry, was 8. The girl, Hope, maybe 6. Both had sunburnt cheeks and blistered feet. Hallie's dress was ripped at the hem and dried blood clung to her ankle where a bramble had torn her skin days earlier. Still, she held her chin high as she stepped into the clearing where a lone cabin stood. Smoke curled from the chimney. She had no idea who lived there, but she prayed they were kind. The door opened before she could knock. A man stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, with a clean-cut jaw and dust clinging to the sleeves of his shirt. He looked maybe 28, sun-browned, with steady blue eyes that caught hers and held them. "You all right?" he asked, voice low, steady. Hallie's voice cracked. "We need help." He looked at the children, at her swollen ankle, and he nodded without a word, held the door wide. "Come in." The warmth inside nearly dropped her to her knees. The cabin was clean, single-roomed, with a stone hearth and a cot in the corner. He moved quick, pulling a blanket from a trunk and guiding the children toward the fire. "I'm Alden West," he said, kneeling to pour water into a tin cup. "What's your name?" "Hallie Prescott," she said, her voice shaking now that the danger was past. "This is Henry." "And Hope?" He handed the cup to Henry, then looked back at her. "You hurt?" She nodded at her ankle. "Nothing bad, just sore." He pulled a stool closer to the fire. "Sit, let me look." She hesitated, pride flaring, but the pain had settled into a dull burn. She sat. He knelt, hands gentle, as he pulled her boot off, then cleaned the dried blood without a word. He wrapped it with a clean strip of cloth, then stood. "You can rest here tonight," he said. "I do not have much, but I will make stew. There is one bed, the children and you can take it." She stiffened. "Where will you sleep?" He glanced at the floor beside the hearth. "There's space enough." That night, after the children had eaten and curled up under the quilt, Hallie watched Alden spread a blanket on the floor. He did not look at her, only lifted his hat from his head and set it beside the fire, then lay down without a word. She whispered, "You do not have to sleep on the floor." "I do," he said. "You need rest." "So do they." In the flickering firelight, Hallie stared at the ceiling beams, feeling something quiet settle in her chest. No man had looked at her like she was worth protecting since the day her husband died. The next morning came with blue skies and birdsong. Alden was already outside, splitting wood. He had given Hope an apple and showed Henry how to stack kindling. His horse was saddled, but he made no mention of leaving. He just worked, steady and calm, over the next days. Hallie cleaned the cabin while her ankle healed. Alden built the children a swing from a rope and a plank. He showed Henry how to whittle a stick into a toy horse. He never asked for thanks, never asked for anything. On the 6th evening, while she stirred beans over the fire, Hallie said quietly, "You have been kind." Alden looked up from where he sat sharpening a knife. "I try to be. You do not even know us." "I know enough," he said. "I know you walked for miles to keep your children safe." "That tells me everything." They ate in silence. After the children were asleep, Hallie stood by the fire, arms folded over her chest. "You lost someone?" she asked. He nodded. "My brother, war, then my folks, fever. I came out here to get away from the noise. You live alone, always have." She looked at the cot, then at the floor where he had slept every night. "You do not have to keep sleeping there." "I do," he said softly. "Not because I have to, because I want to give you peace." Her breath caught. She turned away, heart thudding. The next morning, Henry sat on Alden's lap as he taught him how to tie knots. Hope clung to his arm, watching every move. Hallie stood in the doorway, watching them with a tightness in her throat. Later, while Alden fixed the porch railing, Hallie came out, wiping her hands on her skirt. "You could have turned us away." "I never would." She stepped closer, voice unsteady. "I do not have anything to give you." He set the hammer down, turned to her. "I did not do this to get something back. But you deserve more than thanks. Alden looked at her, eyes steady and warm. I do not want thanks, he said. I want to earn something else, she frowned. What? His voice was low. Will you let me earn my place beside you? She stared at him, heart pounding. I do not expect anything, he said. But if there is room in your life for a man who will never leave you cold, who will work for you, protect you, care for your children like his own, then I would like to stay. Hallie's throat tightened. She looked at his hands, the dirt under his nails, the way his eyes held steady. She reached out and took his hand. There is room, she whispered, and he smiled small, real, and held her hand like it meant something. By the time late August settled over the hills, the air had thinned from the heat of summer and carried the scent of dry grass and distant rain. Hallie had taken up mending Alden's shirts without being asked, and Alden, in turn, had begun shaping logs for a second bed frame with care that said he meant to stay longer than a few weeks. The children had grown used to the rhythm of the place. Henry ran barefoot across the yard with a wooden hoop Alden had carved, and Hope had started humming as she followed Hallie through the small vegetable patch at the edge of the trees. No one said it out loud, but the days had begun to feel like something permanent was taking root. One morning, while Henry and Hope gathered pine cones near the creek, Hallie stepped inside the cabin to find Alden bent over the table, drawing lines on a scrap of paper. His hair was damp from washing at the basin, curls brushing the back of his neck. "What's that?" she asked, setting a tin mug on the shelf. He looked up, brushing a thumb along his jaw. "Map, I was thinking about winter. There's a trading post east of here, 2 days' ride. If I go next week, I can bring back flour, salt, maybe some kerosene." Hallie crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "You wouldn't make it back before the first frost." "Plenty of time," he said. "I'd take the pack horse, leave early, sleep light." She hesitated. "Would you take Henry?" He blinked, surprised. "If you want him to come, I'd be glad to have him." "I think he needs it," she said. "A trip with a man who listens, who shows him things without making him feel small." Alden nodded, slow. "I'll teach him how to read trail signs." "Let him ride part of the way." She watched him fold the paper and tuck it into a tin box. When he straightened, she stepped forward. "You've been thinking ahead," she said. "About the winter, about us still being here." He met her eyes. "I want you to be—" She didn't answer right away. Her fingers found the edge of the table, gripping it lightly. "Hope asked me yesterday if this is our home now. And what did you tell her?" "That I didn't know yet." Alden's voice was quiet. "You don't have to decide today. But I do think about it," she said. "I think about the way you speak to them, how you never speak over them. I think about how you wait for me to offer instead of asking. I was raised with the belief that care is shown, not claimed." She studied his face, the lines beside his eyes made deeper by sun and wind. "Did you always want a family?" she asked. He paused. "I wanted something to come home to, even when I didn't have words for what that looked like." Hallie stepped closer. "You could have built that anywhere." "I didn't know it had come walking out of the woods one summer morning." Her throat tightened, but she didn't look away. That night, Alden sharpened his axe by lantern light while Hallie sat by the window, mending the collar of a dress Hope had torn. The children had fallen asleep, curled together like pups, and the cabin was hushed except for the soft rasp of stone against steel. Without looking up, Alden said, "I've been thinking of building a lean-to on the east side, for storage. Maybe a place for Henry to keep his own tools." Hallie set her needle down. "You're making plans." "I am." She stood slowly, walking over to where he sat. The light caught the curve of his cheek, the shadow under his jaw. "If I say yes," she said, "if I say we'll stay, what then?" Alden looked up, and for the first time his hand reached for hers without hesitation. "Then I'll build the lean-to and plant more rows in the garden, and every day I'll give you reason not to regret the answer." Her breath caught. "And if I say no, I'll saddle the horse and I'll take you wherever you ask me to." She searched his face. "And you wouldn't try to change my mind?" "No, because loving someone means giving them the road, not the reins." She stood quiet for a long moment, his hand still wrapped around hers. "I want to stay," she said finally. "Not just for the children, not because it's easy, but because you've given me space to choose." Alden rose slowly, brushing his fingers along her knuckles. Then I'll spend my life making it a good choice. She reached up, touching his chest just above the buttons of his shirt. You already have. The hills wore gold by mid-September, and the air turned crisp enough to see breath come morning. Henry and Alden had left just after sunrise, the wagon trailing behind the gelding, a full pack lashed down. Hallie stood at the edge of the yard long after they disappeared over the rise, Hope's hand tucked into hers. 3 days passed quiet. Hope spent her hours drawing lines in the dirt with a stick, humming to herself. Hallie split kindling and stitched a pair of mittens from an old wool petticoat. At night she kept the lantern low and the rifle close, though no trouble came. When Alden and Henry returned, dusk was folding in. The wagon held sacks of flour, seed, and a bolt of muslin. Henry sat straighter in the saddle than he ever had, a proud scrape across one cheek and a tooth gone from his grin. He traded for it himself, Alden said, lifting a small tin whistle from his coat pocket. 2 rabbit pelts and a lesson in bartering. Hallie didn't ask how he'd gotten the pelts, only nodded and helped carry in the goods. Henry talked well past supper, voice high with stories of trail crossings and a coyote they'd seen trotting bold beneath the moon. That night, after the children were asleep and the fire had cooled to embers, Hallie stood at the basin, wringing out a cloth. You gave him more than a ride, she said, not turning. Alden sat at the table, unlacing his boots. He earned it all himself. Just needed someone to show him how. She dried her hands slowly, eyes on the dark window pane. He didn't speak like that before, not with that kind of surety. He's got it in him, most do, just takes someone believing it's there. She turned then, arms folded across her chest. You speak like someone who never had that belief growing up. Alden shrugged, gentle. My father was quiet, my mother worked hard. There wasn't much room for praise between plowing and prayer. Hallie moved toward him, the lantern throwing soft light across the floorboards. You ever wish you'd left Montana? I used to think about it, he said. Back when the nights felt longer than the days, but I never could picture another place where I'd want to put down roots. She sat across from him, resting her elbows on the table. I've spent most of my life trying to get somewhere else. Lately, I've been wondering if what I needed wasn't a new place but a new way to stand in it. Alden's gaze held hers, quiet but certain. A place is only as steady as the people in it. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I haven't always been steady. You're here, he said. That's steadier than most. The room held still a long while. Then Hallie rose and crossed to the hearth, picking up the folded quilt. She laid it across the floor near the fire. You don't have to sleep there anymore, she said, voice even. He didn't move. You sure? She nodded once. There's room now, not just in the bed. He stood slowly, eyes never leaving hers. Then I'd be honored. She held out her hand. He took it without hesitation, his fingers warm, calloused. They stood like that for a breath, the fire casting gold between them. Later, in the hush of the cabin, with Hope and Henry safe in their blankets and the wind rustling soft outside, Alden lay beside her for the first time. He didn't reach for her. Just lay close enough to feel the heat between them, their fingers touching lightly beneath the quilt. Hallie whispered into the dark, You said you wanted to earn your place. I did. You already have, she said. But if you want to stay, you'll have to keep earning it, he smiled into the dark. I was hoping you'd say that. The first frost came early that year. It whispered over the fields in the dark, leaving the grass stiff and pale by sunrise. Hallie woke before the others, pulled on her shawl, and stepped outside. Her breath curled in front of her as she moved toward the chicken coop, boots crunching over the brittle ground. Alden joined her a little while later, sleeves rolled to his elbows, a small rake in hand. He didn't speak right away, just helped her scatter feed and check the latch. When they were finished, she leaned her hip against the fence and looked toward the tree line, where the sun was just beginning to break through the mist. I've never stayed anywhere long enough to watch the seasons turn, she said. Alden brushed a bit of straw from his palm. There's something steady about it. Nothing asks permission, it just changes. She nodded faintly, then turned to him. I've been thinking we ought to teach Hope her letters. I can help with that, he said. We kept a primer when I was a boy. It's still in the trunk under the cot. Hallie's brow lifted. You held on to that. It's the only thing I ever saw my mother pause for, he said. She'd sit on the porch in the evenings and read aloud, psalms mostly. I didn't understand them then, but I remember the sound of her voice. Hallie watched him for a long moment. You never talk about her. He shifted his weight. She passed before I turned 16. Fever took her quick. My brother buried her under the cottonwood near the house. That's the same brother you lost in the war. He nodded once. I'm sorry, she said. I don't carry it like I used to, he said softly. But it's always there, just quieter now. She reached for his hand, her grip firm and warm. Maybe that's what healing is, not forgetting, just learning how to carry it without letting it break us. Alden looked down at their joined hands. I'd like to think so. That afternoon, Alden moved the table closer to the window so Hope could trace letters in the light. Hallie sat beside her, guiding her wrist with gentle patience. Henry watched from the bench, his whistle resting idle in his lap, the shine of the trip still lingering in his eyes. As the sun dipped low, Alden stepped outside to bring in the last of the firewood. He returned with his coat dusted in bark and a coil of rope over one shoulder. I'm going to check the snare lines near the ridge, he said. Won't be gone more than an hour. Hallie looked up from stitching the hem of a shirt. You want me to walk part way? He hesitated. You wouldn't mind. I'd like the air. They left the children with a promise to return before dark. The path through the trees was quiet, the ground soft beneath their steps. Hallie kept pace beside him, her hand brushing occasionally against his. They didn't speak until the trail narrowed and the cabin was out of sight. He slowed. I've been wondering something. Go on. When you think about what comes next for yourself, for the children, what do you see? She didn't answer right away. Her eyes followed a hawk circling high above the ridge. I see a place that doesn't feel borrowed, she said finally. Where no one's waiting to take it from us, where hard work means something and the people beside us stay when the weather turns. Alden nodded, quiet. I've been thinking about building another room onto the cabin. It wouldn't take much, just a place for the children to have their own space. She turned toward him, eyes searching. You already see them as yours. I do, he said. Not because I'm trying to replace anyone. Because I care, she stepped closer. And what about me? His answer came without pause. You're not someone I want to protect just because you need it. You're someone I want to stand beside because you choose to keep going, even when it costs you. Her voice dropped. That's not something I've heard before. It's the only way I know how to say what's true. They stood in the fading light, the hush between them full of breath and pine and earth. Hallie reached up, her hand resting against his jaw. I want to build something with you, she said. He held her gaze. Then let's build it slow, right, together. She leaned in, her forehead against his, and for the first time there was no space left between them. When they returned to the cabin, Hope had fallen asleep with her head against Henry's shoulder, the primer open on the table. Hallie tucked them in while Alden stirred the coals back to life. Later, as the wind pressed soft against the cabin walls, Hallie lay beside him, her fingers curled beneath his shirt at the small of his back. You didn't ask me tonight, she murmured. Ask what? If I'd let you earn your place. He kissed the side of her neck, slow and sure. You already did. By early October, the aspens had begun to yellow, their leaves flickering like coins in the wind. Alden stood beside the fence post he'd set that morning, sweat clinging to his neck despite the chill. Across the yard, Hallie was kneeling near the root cellar, a basket of potatoes beside her, and her sleeves rolled to her elbows. She worked with the steady focus he'd come to know, her braid tucked under a kerchief and her brow furrowed in thought. He crossed to her, wiping his hands on his pants. That root cellar holding up all right, she nodded without looking up. Dry as a bone. I think we'll have enough to carry us through the cold months if we ration right. He crouched beside her. I've been thinking about getting a few sheep come spring. There's grazing enough in the back pasture. Wool could be worth something, and it'd give Henry something of his own to tend. She glanced at him, mouth softening. You already have plans for spring. I do, he said, then hesitated. But I don't want to keep making plans unless you want to be part of them. I wouldn't be out here digging if I didn't, she said, brushing her skirt back. But I think we ought to talk about what this means, all of it, what we're building. He sat back on his heels. You want something written down? I want something that doesn't get questioned come winter, she said. For the children, for us, something clear. His eyes searched hers. You asking me to marry you, Hallie Prescott? I'm saying I'd take your name if you offered it, she said, wiping dirt from her hands. But I've been someone's wife before. I've walked into promises I didn't understand. I won't do it again unless it's a true partnership. Alden didn't speak for a breath, then he stood and offered her his hand. Let's go inside. She took it, rising slowly, the basket swinging from her other arm. Inside, the children were seated at the table, Henry carving a sliver of wood into a small hook while Hope braided string for the curtain ties. Alden set the kettle on, then drew out 2 chairs near the hearth. I never thought I'd share my life with someone, he said once they sat. Not because I didn't want it. I just figured that kind of thing wasn't meant for me, but you walked into my clearing and nothing's been the same. She folded her hands. I don't need flowers or a preacher. I just need the work to be shared and the decisions to be made together. My mother used to say the land doesn't care what words are spoken, only what's done, Alden said. So I'll say this plain, I'd be honored to marry you, Hallie. Not because I want to keep you, but because I want to build something that lasts. She reached for his hand. Then we'll do it before the first snowfall, and we'll do it right. They married beneath the cottonwood at the back of the property, the one Alden had planted the year he built the cabin. Henry wore his best shirt, tucked and belted, and stood beside Alden with his chin lifted. Hope held a small bundle of dried flowers, her cheeks pink with cold and pride. There was no preacher, just the wind and the earth and the quiet promise spoken between 2 people who had learned the cost of solitude and still chose to trust again. Hallie wore a dress she'd sewn from the muslin Alden had brought back from the trading post. Alden had trimmed his beard and worn the old vest he'd kept stored in the bottom of the trunk. They exchanged words, not vows, speaking softly and holding each other's hands like anchors. That night, after the children had fallen asleep in their own room, the one Alden had built with his hands, and Hallie had helped chink with mud, they lay in the bed beneath a quilt she'd stitched from old shirts and flour sacks. Alden traced the curve of her wrist with a thumb. I used to wonder what kind of man I'd be with a family, he said. Wasn't sure I'd be enough. You are, she said. Not because you try to be something you're not, but because you show up every day and stay. He pressed his lips to her shoulder, slow and sure. I'll keep showing up. We both will. They fell asleep like that, the fire low, the wind rustling the trees outside, and the silence between them content. Years passed. The sheep came in the spring, quiet and hardy. Henry took to them like he'd been born for it, learning the rhythm of their care and the patience of their breeding. He grew into a tall, broad-shouldered boy with a steady hand and a quiet confidence that echoed Alden's. Hope learned her letters, then her numbers. By the time she turned 10, she was helping Hallie keep the ledgers for the small wool trade they'd begun with the nearby settlement. She lined her shoes with rabbit fur in winter and sang while she worked, her voice clear and low. The cabin grew, room by room. Alden built a porch where Hallie could shell peas in the summer, and she planted sweet peas along the rail. They held hands when they walked to the stream, and Hallie still reached for Alden's back when they lay down at night, fingers curling into the place she'd claimed as hers. They never spoke of the years before, not because they forgot, but because they didn't need to. The past had shaped them, but it was the life they chose each day that defined them. And when the wind came down from the mountains and the fire cracked in the hearth, Hallie would stand in the doorway and watch the land they'd made theirs quiet, steady, and full of the kind of love that didn't have to be spoken to be known. They lived long, and they lived together. And they were happy,